I sat in the passenger seat and didn't even think, didn't even faze me that this was a trap.
Highway 20 twists and turns as it winds from Sisters to Lebanon, carving its way through mountainsides covered in dense evergreen forest. It's a sleepy stretch of road with little development and few landmarks, and it's dark at night. Exits lead to logging roads or campgrounds and quickly disappear into the brush.
I fell asleep, passed out. I woke up with my head banging on the seat.
Richanda's classmates, Mandy and Michelle, had been molested in their own home for years. Well before that summer, the sisters had begun to notice familiar signs in Richanda, in addition to her symptoms of physical abuse. She had become depressed, was tired all the time, and had stopped caring as much about her appearance. Their suspicions seemed confirmed when Richanda told Michelle she'd sought help from their school's counselor.
We were in the library, it was a book fair. I just looked up and she was crying. And she said, I'll be back. And she got up and left, came back to the library, I don't know, about 20 minutes later, and she said, you know what you told me that happened to you? And I'm like, yeah, that's happened to me too.
During that time, she got really depressed. She didn't want to go home.
She kept asking, can I spend the night? Can I spend the night? Can I spend the night? And back then, my parents, we weren't allowed to hardly spend a night with anybody. We pretty much had to beg. So they let her spend the night.
That was a Friday night. A Saturday she stayed, and then that Sunday her mom comes to get her, and Richanda hid in my closet.
Screaming and throwing fits, didn't want to leave.
Throwing clothes over her, throwing stuff at her mom.
You don't act like that if you just, gonna be sent to your room. You do not act like that. And she was literally terrified.
Don't make me go, I don't want to go, please don't make me go. And I think her mom's like, okay, you can stay with Jennifer, but I don't think she got to.
A couple weeks after that, that's when we snuck her. We had our older friends write a note.
And forged my mom's name. We took that note, took it to the school. Richanda walked home with us.
We told her we'd hide her for as long as we could.
So we snuck her through a window, and she stayed the night with us.
What can we do? We were little kids too. We tried. It's pretty bad when kids have to go to that level to do that.
I've never felt like any adult who was put into the place of authority to help her ever helped her.
I think that she did try to protect herself, and nobody listened.
Richanda continued trying to spend nights away from home whenever possible, with any friends or relatives who could take her in. While she mostly kept the details of what she was going through to herself, it was clear that it was getting worse.
She started cutting herself. Even in class, she would just take a tack and just cut herself.
And I'd ask her, is she all right? And she's just like, I don't want to be home. What's going on? And she wouldn't, say what the exact reason was. Now getting older, I have my suspicions what those reasons were. When you're constantly in a state of fear all the time, actually analyzing what's going on you can't. Because you're just in a state of fear, you're on eggshells. You just want to have a normal day, just a normal day. That's all you want.
I remember her telling me and Mandy a couple things. One time I was doing dishes and he called me over on the couch and just started tickling me.
And it got more aggressive to where he was trying to put his body on top of her. And Richanda had kicked enough somehow and got away. After that incident is when the other stuff started happening when he was coming into her room.
She never said if anything had happened, but I'm pretty sure it did.
We never felt like she had to because we were kind of going through the same thing at home. But it's not okay for him to go into her room at night. It was never okay. And I always felt like he was raping her.
Had she been abused by anyone, by any of the men in her life that you know of?
Not if I'm aware of. I don't ever recall her
She
being
confided any
No.
concerns about that? No.
My read of it now is that there was something going on at home between John and Richanda, because when Richanda did confide to Mom what Dad said, you know, how he was gonna get charges filed and stuff, I know my mom told John, and it was the very next day that she was gone.
When Richanda arrived back at Santiam Junction, it hadn't been long since she had confirmed to her biological father that she'd been sexually abused. After that conversation, her father had called Linda with threats to involve the authorities, and Linda had told John. Richanda tried and failed to ensure that she wouldn't be home alone without Byron. Then, Richanda disappeared.
You know, she was home.
Well, this isn't even our suspect, but he hung around with our suspect.
Once the girls were found, we kind of just forgot about them and moved on. Now I think about it a lot more, like when people die, but then I would be like, you know, oh well. And I know that sounds really bad, and it was. Now that I think about it, that was pretty. And none of us went to the funeral. None of us have ever talked to the family. It's like they ceased to exist, and we just quit talking about them. Now I think, when I think about it, I think I might have been able to prevent it, but I was young and didn't care. I know that sounds hard. Yeah. He was. Sorry. Oh, it's okay. It just, if that would have been my girls, would I have wanted somebody to step in? And probably, but I didn't. I was a kid too. I loved it.
When I asked Ron, who's looking out right now, who's speaking for Melissa and Sheila, really, it was just you, basically.
Yeah, no one else is around, I don't think. Since I was 16 years old, I pretty much made my life completely evolved around the disappearance of my sister and who did it and stuff like that. I went up to where she was found probably 100 times. I've laid down the same spot where she was found. I held a big deal on what happened to my sister because I always promised her, you know, nothing will ever happen to you. I guarantee that, you know, as a promise. And that's just something I can't take back. You know. Would I change that promise? No. It'd be the same promise it was back then as it is today. It's just one that was never completely fulfilled.
Aykroyd's odd schedule and work arrangement at the Sweet Home maintenance yard meant he rarely interacted with his coworkers there. But on one night, when the shop would normally have been empty, he surprised two workers who were there on a special shift. At the time, the encounter struck the men as strange, but it would acquire a more sinister meaning later on.
It was probably around 9:30, and I heard the door open, you know, and I go, who in the world's that, you know? Aykroyd, he'd come in through and parked over next to our office in the bay. He started to walk over, going through the area, and we noticed he had blood all over his hands and arms. And I go, what the heck happened to you? And he goes, oh, I ran into a deer and I just had to gut him out. Most of the time, if you hit a deer, you just throw it off the road into the ditch and go on. Why would you get a deer in the middle of the night? That didn't make sense. did not make sense.
The story he told one person was that he gutted the deer for someone else, for another motorist. And they took it. That doesn't add up to you?
No. It don't sound like something Aykroyd would do.
They mentioned it to me the next time I saw him, which I think was the next day. Just brought it up. Wow. You know, Aykroyd came in last night and he was all bloody, and we were kind of going, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Oh, I butchered a deer for somebody." That was kind of that. Nothing of it. Somewhere down the line, they started talking about these two girls being missing from Newport.
And that's kind of when we put two and two together. Like, wait a minute. Those girls disappeared about that time he came in with all that blood on his hands.
Both Marvin and Rick came to me and they were just totally freaked out. What if he murdered those girls and that wasn't really deer blood? He had been in Newport. He had been working over there. And then he's all bloody.
It'll probably never leave my mind. Just that part of it. But nobody ever asked us.
Aykroyd's name had come up when Sheila and Melissa disappeared. One officer had even sketched out his connections to the girls through who they each knew and where they all lived. But he was being more thoroughly investigated for other crimes. The K. Turner Task Force was closing in, and Aykroyd knew it.
In this interview with Aykroyd, he denies murdering Turner, saying only he visited a friend at Camp Sherman the morning Turner disappeared.
Well, they're talking to the guy that admits that he killed her.
It's a guy there, I don't know if it was Pam's brother or brother-in-law or something. He had some statements that Beck made. They were leaving. He said, "We got to go up on the mountain and see John get our story straight."
Pam was Beck's ex-wife, Pam Ramirez. She had originally provided an alibi for both Beck and Aykroyd for the morning Kay was killed, but had divorced him and moved to California in the years since.
It became obvious we needed to interview Beck's ex-wife. So we planned a meeting to California.
That's when it really opened up. The famous quote was like, "I lied like hell."
When Beck and him returned that day that she disappeared, they had blood all over them.
He had her burn his clothes in his brand new boots.
Both had blood on them and they didn't have a deer like they were supposed to have.
It became very clear that Beck was a part of it that day, and that she actually knew that he was a part of it and covered it up. But she was very afraid of him, and for good reason.
She was afraid to until after they got a divorce. And then she decided to tell the truth.
She has told us that you talked to her.
But it was a very important, maybe one of the most important things I've ever done in my life, is helping get him off the streets. You just don't know how many lives might have been saved.
It saved women's lives. If he'd stayed out, if he had never been convicted, he and maybe Beck would have done more crimes and killed more women, for sure. You know, he managed to get through that whole thing without ever getting caught. That was the only time he's ever been arrested or charged with anything in his life. Not because he was all that smart, but he managed to do it.
How did Aykroyd manage to do it? He was an opportunistic killer who preyed on women who were vulnerable and exposed. A runner on an empty road, a child who feared him, two teens adrift in the world. There were no witnesses and no physical evidence, but there had been an unmistakable warning sign. Before he was ever suspected of being a killer, Aykroyd had raped Marlene Gabrielson in the woods outside of Sisters. She went to police, and they dismissed her as a liar. Aykroyd knew he'd gotten away with rape. He even laughed about it. He used the cover of Highway 20 to stalk women who were alone and counted on society's blind eye to marginalize people to avoid prosecution for decades. Killing the right kind of people in the right kind of place during the right kind of time was all it really took.